Welcome to part 2 of our webinar series on building a recommender system. I'm Cameron Lawson. I'm the services manager here at Selerity. I've been working with SAS probably since about the mid-90s and in a range of different programming, administration, architectural and management roles. My background with that is I have some statistical experience. I used to actually do statistical analysis in a former career. However, I'm not a dedicated data scientist by any means. What we'll be showing you with the Selerity DS Starter package that we'll be using today, just how simple it is to actually be able to actually go and create a model with a little bit of background knowledge about the types of statistics involved and so forth, and show you how, with using the different features of the platform, how easy it is to actually go from an idea to market very quickly and be able to actually deploy our recommendations and run that within a batch scenario. So before we start, there's just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover. Today's webinar will be available to watch after the live session. You can access it using the same link that you're using now, and we'll also be uploading it to our YouTube channel. We'd also love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tab at the top of your chat window. And we'll also be answering questions at the end of the session. But if we don't get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. And we'll also be running a series of polls throughout the webinar, basically to get your feedback about what you would actually like to see from us next in future webinars and so forth. So just a little about who we are. We were formed in 2009 with an objective to be able to empower and enable SAS users with the means to outsource the provisioning and maintenance of their SAS ecosystems. At Selerity, we're committed to increasing the overall productivity of the organizations that we work with from all around the world. We offer a wide range of services from SAS installation, administration, and on-demand support services, as well as several proprietary technologies that we also develop. At Selerity, we help organizations gain better insights more quickly and more efficiently. We have a dedicated team, and our clients benefit from reliable and cost-effective expertise available anytime, anywhere. We have a very strong relationship with SAS. We are gold partners, SAS resellers, and we were awarded the SAS Australia and New Zealand Partner of the Year for 2020. We understand the importance of expedience and how SAS users simply want to be able to turn on and use their systems, knowing that they're getting the right insights as quickly as possible. So Selerity is actually very pleased to be able to offer a range of the new SAS Via packages available from SAS, bundled into a managed platform service, which is essentially a turnkey service that you can actually subscribe to. We set it up for you and you can start using almost immediately. This is webinar 2 in a 3-part series. Selerity offer a number of different managed packages that include SAS software, and the 3 that we've chosen for this series are based on SAS Business Analytics, which we covered in webinar 1, SAS Data Science Starter, which we'll be covering today, and SAS Data Science Accelerated, which we'll be covering in our last webinar. The SAS Data Science Starter is a package that we'll be using today, and this includes all of the SAS Business Analytics features that we covered in webinar 1, as well as adding to that the power of SAS Visual Statistics. Our Selerity DS Starter package provides all of this software, as well as the infrastructure, the management, and all of the support needed to use it into a turnkey solution that you can start using straight away. In part 3, we'll showcase the power of having machine learning and AI capabilities added through the SAS Visual Data Mining and Machine Learning application. Okay, so just to recap what we covered previously in webinar one, we built a simple recommender system using basic statistics and visualizations that are available using the Selerity BA offering powered by SAS. The solution that we developed, which was essentially more based on filtering and provided simple based recommendations. In this webinar, we're actually going to apply a little bit more of analytical smarts to our recommender system, and actually start scoring and deriving a predicted rating for our users in terms of being able to identify in a little bit more of a more pervasive way particular objects that we want to actually recommend to our end user. We'll go over the Selerity DS Starter offering, which we'll be using in this webinar to build our recommender system. And following that, we'll then get into the actual technical detail of looking at the data preparation, the scoring, and the recommendation aspects of the solution that we've built. Lastly, we'll then also go over next steps and in terms of what's in store with our third webinar in the series. So in webinar one, we introduced basic visualization and statistical concepts using the Selerity Business Analytics package. And in this webinar, we're going to introduce some more of the power of SAS by using more advanced visual interfaces to simplify statistical programming tasks, and really introducing how SAS can assist in democratizing analytics within your organization and your teams. In this webinar, we'll show you how simple it is to go from an idea to market very quickly with this service. If you have not already watched or attended our first webinar, I encourage you to do so, and you can go back and view that on our YouTube channel. As this webinar is also being posted to the channel, we'll also include a link to the first webinar in the description for you when we've uploaded this video. The Selerity Business Analytics package is a great service offering for teams who need to perform simple to intermediate business and statistical analysis. However, many organizations need the power of more advanced statistical methods to not only report on what has happened, but to be also able to predict on what will happen within their organization. Enter the Selerity Data Science Starter package. Built with the power of SAS, Selerity Data Science Starter builds on the Selerity BA package, but also bundles in the SAS Visual Statistics offering. And this is all packaged into a fully managed service for you, which you can subscribe to and start using straight away. In conjunction to this, we also ship the service with a fully running Python and Jupyter Notebook environment. With a competitive subscription, your organization doesn't need to focus on the uptime, the maintenance, and the licensing of the servers. You can focus on what you do best, delivering powerful analytic insights and exploiting your data in new and meaningful ways. SAS Visual Statistics brings a wealth of advanced statistical offerings, both within the visual and the programming environments. With the Selerity Data Science package, you have the choice of both. Staff who prefer programming interfaces can use SAS Studio to develop custom SAS programs that interact with VIA, while those who prefer visually driven approaches can utilize the power of the visual analytics interface and the visual statistics to perform complex programming tasks simply and intuitively. So enough about the ins and outs of the Data Science Starter package. Let's get in and start having a look at some of the technical stuff and actually see how we're going to build our recommender system using the Data Science Starter. In our last webinar, we built a simple demographic content-based recommender system using some simple statistical inferences. In this webinar, we'll start to move more towards a collaborative recommender system by building some new predicted ratings based on the commonalities of users and the movies that they've rated against those that they have not actually rated in the past. We're making an assumption here that if a user has not actually rated a movie, that then they have not watched it, and that is grounds for being able to recommend. We'll be preparing the data for our scoring using SAS Studio and the programming interface of the Data Science Starter package. We'll then build a scoring model and compare that against alternative models using visual statistics. Here you'll start to see how VA is more than just visualization. We'll also use the export code feature of Visual Statistics to take our model and integrate that code into a into a project, which we can then actually run on a batch-related basis and productionize our actual recommendations. And then finally, we'll just show a simple visualization of the output. All of the tasks that you see in this webinar are completed using the Data Science Starter package and are available out of the box when you subscribe to the service. So, what are we actually producing? As you'll see, we'll show a large number of features of the package in this demo and highlight the versatility of the solution to your working style and your business use case. Okay, so let's get started. The first phase that we're going to undertake is to first prepare our data in VIA using the programmatic interface. And in this scenario, we're using SAS Studio. So from the main navigation area or SAS drive, I've gone to my project and into content, and I have the movies.sas dataset that I prepared earlier. Now I can just double click on this, or from the menu, select Develop SAS Code to open up SAS Studio, and then I can select the data set. So let's just double click on it. Now I've just run this earlier, and the purpose of this webinar isn't really to go into the detail of the code itself that I'm performing. But basically what I've done is I've taken our movie genome data set, imported it, developed some attributes to enrich the data, and then wrote some procasutal procedures to load that data into VIA so as it can be made available to visual analytics and visual statistics. The programmatic environment is very much like your traditional SAS 9 environment, and incredibly flexible. With the Data Science Starter package, you also get a series of additional statistical procedures that are available, similar to what you might have in your older SAS Stat product. However, you do get some additional CAS actions which actually let you run these statistical procedures. Purpose of this webinar is to actually not look so much at the programmatic interface. If you are interested in knowing more about that, and it's something that you'd like us to actually pursue, vote in the poll that we have available here in the webinar to see, and basically, let us know if you'd like us to create a further webinar in the future, which focuses on some of the programmatic aspects, in particular CAS actions. So after running this, I now end up with a base table that is about 270,000 rows. The full ratings table in the movie genome data set is actually about 28 million rows. And the way that I've actually reduced the data down is to produce one unique row per movie and rating. This lets me run my scoring over a much smaller set of data and basically achieve the same outcome as if I was going to input all 28 million rows, but just a lot more efficiently. And this is what the data set looks like. So you'll see here I have the movie and the rating, number of ratings, some basic statistics, and then each attribute that has been assigned to that movie, I've then actually turned into and transposed into columns. Now, this was really the extent of the information that's available in the movie database that I'm using. If I had additional attributes about the users, I would also add that in at this stage. So now in order to use it, I just need to go to Explore and Visualize. And I've just pre-selected already the actual table, the ABT rating table. And the first thing that we need to do just before we actually get in and start using it is to actually just apply a little bit of treatment to the data set to make it suitable for some of the statistical procedures that we'll actually be running. So the first thing we're going to do is actually create a new data item, which is a petition. Now this petition basically creates a training and a validation data set. So we're just going to use a 70-30 split, and I'll use a random number seed as well. And you'll see now that that's actually created this petition variable for me. The next step that I want to do is I'm actually going to go through and change all of these categorical objects into and classify them as categories. At the moment, they're classed as measures, and so if I added them into my procedures, that would actually sum the values. For what we're doing, it's probably not too much of an issue, but it's a good idea to actually correctly classify your data. And it's just as simple as going through, selecting the actual attribute or variable that we want to change, and from the classification, I can select category. Now, if I was doing some sort of mapping or geo type of reporting or analysis, I could also classify address information or latitude and longitudes to geography, which would then let me use some of the mapping procedures as well. You'll also notice that for these variables, I can also change the format if I wanted to. So for example, here with musical, it's using best, but if I had I can use either standard out of the box SAS formats, or I can actually load custom formats into the environment itself as well. Okay, we're getting closer. Okay, so now we have all of our categories. Our measures, and then also underneath our petition variable that we created just before. So let's get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is I actually want to create a cluster. So you just go to Objects, and you'll see here all of the standard Visual Analytics menu items that you get with the business analysis package. What I'm actually interested in here is this new option called SAS Visual Statistics. And we have a cluster function available. So what we do is I'll select this, and I can either drag this into the window or I can just right click on it and say add to the current page, and that will add it to the currently open tab. So it will first prompt me to assign the data. So if I just need to click on there. And then in order to select all of the actual variables that I'm interested in, all I need to do is check one of them, then press Control and Shift, and I can select all of them at once. So saves you a few mouse clicks. We'll also add in here the movie year and the number of ratings and the rating itself. So that's actually now running. And that's already returned my cluster. So you'll see there that it's actually clustered over 272,000 rows, which is a lot faster and a lot more efficient than the full 28 million rows, which we'll be actually using at the end of this. Now, if I go to my options, you'll see that I can actually customize quite a number of values and configuration parameters for the clustering. I'm going to actually leave it as standard right now, but I can change the number of bins in my cluster. I can also change the standardization method and the assignment method. I can also modify the actual visualization as well that gets presented. If I go to the actual visualization, I can just hover over the heat map here, and it will actually show me what values are actually participating in what cluster. So now we have this this visualization. It's kind of useless unless we can actually do something with it, and this is where visual analytics really really comes into its own. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get the cluster ID that it's actually created and add it to my data set. And it's just a very simple right click. And then I can choose derive cluster ID items. So here I can actually add to my data set the cluster ID and my distance measures. I'm not going to use the distance measures in this webinar, but I'll just uncheck them, click OK. And if I go back to my data now, you'll see here a derived section, and here's my cluster ID. So the main reason that I did that is I actually want to add that now to another statistical procedure, and that's a decision tree. So I go to the Visual Statistics menu, and I'll select Add to New Page. And you'll see that it's created a new tab for me. While we're at it, I'll just rename this cluster. And while I'm thinking of it, we'll call this decision tree. And now I need to assign data. Now I can do it once again from the prompt here for assigning data, or I just go to roles and I select the decision tree. And you'll see that visual analytics and visual statistics will prompt me for the types of values that is expected for the given statistical procedure. So for a decision tree, we have a response variable, which is actually what we're going to be predicting, and our predictors. So we'll choose, once again, all of our different attributes, but we're also going to include the cluster ID. Decision trees are good for basically working out predictions with not actually having to do a lot to your data in some cases, in most cases actually. So I'm just going to choose all of these, and I'm also going to include the movie year, the number of ratings. Now I'm also going to add the petition variable that we created earlier. So you'll see that that's already created a decision tree for me. But one of the things that I want to do is I actually want to auto-tune this decision tree. So from the options menu, I can scroll down to the decision tree section, choose auto-tune, and here I can actually customize how I'm going to tune my model. I'm going to keep the defaults, but this will give me a maximum number of seconds to run for the tuning, the maximum iterations, and the maximum number of evaluations. And this will actually help me prune my decision tree down and potentially not overfit it. Okay, so now my decision tree is auto-tuned. You'll see that it's actually changed slightly. And it's actually it is actually quite ragged. Now, this could be a good opportunity where, for example, I could go back and modify the actual predictors or add some additional variables such as weight and so forth. I can also go through here and change some of the options and the configuration values for the decision tree itself. So that might include the number of leaves, the maximum number of levels, and the maximum branches, and also the number of predictor bins. I'm actually just going to leave this as is for the sake of this webinar. But what we want to do now is we've got one model, but we don't necessarily know if that's actually the right thing to do. Like a decision tree is good, but it may not necessarily be the right statistic or the right statistical method to use in this scenario. So I'm going to actually go back to my objects menu. And here from Visual Statistics, I'm actually going to do a linear regression as well. So let's add to a new page. And I'll go to my roles. And once again, I select the rating. And you'll notice that when I actually am adding the required variables to your visualization, that classification is actually helping to prune down which variables are actually applicable for the given parameter. So here I'm adding continuous effects, so number of ratings, and let's do the movie year. And for my classifications, we'll add all of the same values. And once again, we'll add our petition for training and validation. So that's now run, and that's actually giving me the result. And that's essentially telling me something which I think would be probably obvious, that drama and horror and action really are key contributors to classifying of movies and the ratings. You'll notice as well that in the visualization, I can actually choose what statistic is actually visible. So here I'm basically showing the ACE measure, but I can also, of course, view the R-square, and you'll see here next to it the actual values that have actually already been calculated. So now I have two models. I'll name that. But which one do we choose? Well, thankfully, with the Visual Statistics and the Data Science Starter package, I can go from the menu and I can choose Model Comparison. So once again, right-click and add to a new page. And you'll see what it's actually done is it's actually already chosen my petition, the response variable that we're actually looking to predict, and all models that I've actually got in my visual analytics report right now. It will actually let me select them. So what we're doing here is we're going to actually compare decision tree and linear regression, and we'll look at the squared error and other statistical methods to actually decide which model should actually be our champion model. Okay, so what we can see here is that our model comparison, looking at the square error, is actually decided that the decision tree is the optimal model for us to use. And you'll see here how that compares both in terms of between the regression and the decision tree in terms of the assessment. So what I can actually do now, I can actually go to my decision tree. And what I actually want to do here is I want to actually export out the predicted rating and the leaf ID that's actually been generated. And we'll actually use the leaf ID basically as a way, almost as a more fine-grained cluster on the data. So now that if I go back to my data menu, you'll see here that they've actually been added. So I now have the cluster ID, the predicted rating, the residual rating, and the leaf ID available to me to be able to actually use in further analysis. Or in this scenario, what I actually want to do is I actually want to just use the decision tree as my scoring algorithm. So I've got it here with inside Visual Analytics, but really what I need to do is I want to be able to run this in batch, and I want to be able to run this over the entire data set. So with the Data Science Starter package and Visual Statistics, what we can do is we can actually export our model. So I just right-click once again, select Export, and this has actually gone off and created and generated the actual SAS code needed to run this model. Writing this type of code by hand is an incredibly complex and time-consuming process. And here I've done it in a case of maybe about 10 minutes, if that, from start to finish. Now you'll notice here that it's provided some options just around making sure that it handles any spaces or named literals in variables. But the actual code itself isn't actually wrapped up inside a data step or a procedure at all. It's actually the open code. And what we'll need to do here is I can either export it, which will save it to a file. I'll just generate it again. Or I can just actually copy this code just by clicking in the window, highlighting it, and copy. And what we'll do now is we'll actually slightly paste this code into a data plan and then just slightly modify it so as we can actually then run it over our full data set and then also join back our user specific information. So that way we will then actually have our full 28 million rows of ratings, and we can then actually use that as the basis for our recommendation. Okay, so now that we've actually exported our scoring code, what I'm actually jumped back over into SAS Studio, and I've actually refactored both the data preparation code that we went through earlier and taken the exported scoring code and basically put that into a standalone project, which I can then now schedule and run on a batch schedule. So once again, we're not really focusing so much on the actual coding aspects in this webinar, but I've created a new version controlled folder called Webinar 2, and I've broken up my code in terms of initialization, so setting up my CAS libraries and so forth. The movies.sas data program that I had earlier, I've now actually refactored that and renamed it as a base table. And here I've taken the score code, which I've exported out, and I've literally just pasted that into a new SAS program. Just writing out to work at the moment and using the input table that I prepared earlier, which formed the base table. One thing that I have done is, you'll notice down the bottom, is I've just added a rename statement. The exported code will actually give unique names to the leaf ID and the predicted rating variables. And here I just want to actually abstract that and give them a generic name. Lastly, what we do is I've then actually gone and created some final data sets. Now this in a real life scenario may be actually called dynamically and it's something completely separate. But what I've done is I've actually created essentially two data sets, one of which is a listing of the data sets that a user has actually watched. And then another data set of our recommendations, which is based on the predicted rating that we've generated as part of our decision tree model. And then lastly, we just load the data into SAS. Now, in terms of actually running this on a batch schedule, it's super easy inside SAS Studio. I can just simply right-click on my main program, schedule as a job. And here I can actually set my schedules. So you'll see here that in terms of what's available, it's quite flexible. I can also run in different time zones if I need to. And I can also set the ending of the schedule on either a certain date or after a number of iterations. I can actually look at that by going over to my manage environment, looking at jobs. And you'll see here that here's my schedule that was one that I created earlier. And I can look at it there. I can also right click. And I haven't actually scheduled this to run yet, but the runtime history will be available there. So now over to our actual recommendations. So what I've done is I've just created a very simple report here. In a production scenario as well, we may not actually even use visual analytics for this particular application. We may call this data through a REST interface, for example, or via some sort of other thick client. The ability to do that is inbuilt into the platform and is really quite flexible based on your use case. But just for the sake of demonstration, it's a simple report which essentially has two data sets, the user watched and the user recommendations. The top table has the movies that this user has watched. And then the bottom table has a list of recommendations. And if I go to my Actions tab, I've actually mapped the two tables together by the leaf ID. So what this will do is when I click on a movie here, you'll see that the recommendations now actually show up for those leaf IDs. And these are movies that the user has actually not watched, but we would recommend based on the predicted rating. Now, in terms of how I've worked out which movies, because there's thousands and thousands of movies in each leaf, I actually create a rank here. And this is actually just showing my top 10 by the predicted rating. Now, the data set itself is actually contextual in that the rating itself is based on the given rating that this same user would give for a similar type of movie. So movies may actually appear in more than one leaf. And this is something that you will see in other recommender systems like Netflix and Stan and those types of apps where you'll actually have multiple categories. Which might be actually the leaf ID itself might actually be given some sort of textual category, and the same movie may actually appear in multiple ones of those because it's actually contextual. So as you can see, the actual recommendations themselves actually don't look too bad, and this is actually really without a lot of effort. When all is said and done, we could actually improve this further by enriching our attributes as part of our model. We could also apply weights to certain factors. We could also enrich it with more external data, general information about the users if we had it available, and so forth. But really, like when we actually look at it, it's actually pretty good. So if I'm looking at something like horror and science fiction, here like Apocalypto, I'm getting City of Lost Children, which is a bloody great movie, to be honest. Um, and we can see here with things like Chronicles of Narnia that we're getting recommendations come through for Toy Story, Sabrina, Jumanji, which are very similar types of movies. Gladiator, we get to see other action style movies, which aren't actually necessarily classified as being action movies in our data. So things like Casino, Dangerous Minds. So as you can see, using the Data Science Starter package, I'm able to build and execute a complete analytic process without once having to focus on the administration or the upkeep of the solution. I can prepare and present my data using a range of interfaces that suit my work style, and I can build advanced decision modeling and scoring processes and determine a champion model and then build a batch process to make the analytics that I've actually produced actionable. In the last webinar of the series, we'll introduce the Selerity Data Science Advanced package, which will further extend the solution by incorporating SAS visual data mining and machine learning. And in this webinar, we'll show you how we can actually use advanced machine learning techniques visually and build a complete analytical pipeline and manage that model within the VIA interface itself and govern that model in an effective and reliable manner. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us today for this webinar. If you'd like any more information about the Data Science Starter package or any of our other services, or anything SAS related for that matter, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We're available on the web at celeritysas.com, via email at info@celeritysas.com, or by phone. So thanks again for your time. I'll be hanging around at the end of the webinar to take any questions. And also, if you'd like to watch this again, please go to our YouTube channel and we'll be uploading this video for you to be able to watch again in the future. Once again, thanks very much.